When we imagine the early days of colonial America, the image is almost always the same. We see the Pilgrims of Plymouth Rock. We see men in black hats and buckles, women in modest bonnets, a people defined by piety, hard work, and a somber, gray existence. We are taught that they came to a new world to build a city on a hill, a place of rigid moral order. But there is another story, a story that the history books largely buried, and for good reason. Just a few miles up the coast from the grim prairies of Plymouth, there was a very different kind of settlement. It was a place where English settlers and Native Americans danced together around an 80-foot-tall phallic totem. It was a place of free-flowing liquor, recited poetry, and open rebellion against the moral authority of the church. It was called Merrymount, and its leader, Thomas Morton, was the Lord of Misrule, who almost changed the course of American history before it truly began. To understand the scandal of Merrymount, we have to understand the man behind it. Thomas Morton was not a separatist. He was not a Puritan. He was a high church Anglican lawyer from the West Country of England, a man who enjoyed the finer things in life: falconry, classical literature, and a good drink. When he arrived in Massachusetts in the mid-1620s, he didn't see a wilderness to be feared or a devil's playground to be tamed. He saw paradise. While the Pilgrims at Plymouth were starving, freezing, and dying in their damp cabins, struggling to coax crops from the rocky soil, Morton looked at the landscape and saw abundance. He wrote glowing descriptions of the New World, comparing it to a rich widow waiting to be wooed. He admired the Native Americans, the Algonquian-speaking peoples, treating them not as savages, but as potential business partners and, eventually, friends. In 1625, Morton helped establish a trading post at a place the natives called Passamaquoddy, which he renamed Mount Wollaston. But the social order there was fragile. The settlement was originally led by a Captain Wollaston, who, finding the trade difficult, decided to take many of the indentured servants down to Virginia to sell them into slavery. Morton saw an opportunity. In a move that would terrify the upper classes of both England and the colonies, he gathered the remaining servants and proposed a mutiny. He told them that if they kicked out Wollaston's lieutenant, they would live as free men, partners in trade, rather than servants. They agreed. They ousted their masters, and Morton declared them a consociation, a free community. They renamed the settlement Merrymount, or Mountain by the Sea. But in the local dialect, and certainly in the ears of their neighbors, it became known simply as Merrymount, and merry it was. Morton realized that the key to survival wasn't isolation. It was integration. He realized that the Native Americans were expert hunters who had access to the most valuable commodity in the Atlantic world: beaver pelts. Morton began trading aggressively. But he didn't just trade trinkets and beads. He traded what the natives actually wanted: steel knives, blankets, and most controversially, guns. This was the first strike against him in the eyes of Plymouth. The Pilgrims lived in constant fear of the surrounding tribes. They believed that putting firearms into the hands of Native Americans was a death sentence for the English colonies. Governor William Bradford, the leader of Plymouth, looked at Merrymount with horror. He didn't just see a security threat. He saw moral cancer. In Plymouth, life was strict. In Merrymount, life was a party. Morton's men didn't toil in the fields from dawn till dusk. They hunted, they traded, and they feasted. Morton encouraged his men to marry Native American women, fostering a mixed-race society that terrified the racial and religious purists of Plymouth. To the Pilgrims, the wilderness was the domain of Satan. To Morton, the wilderness was a new Arcadia, a classical paradise where the rules of the old world didn't apply. The tension reached its breaking point in the spring of 1627. Morton decided to host a May Day festival. Now, in the England of the 1600s, May Day was already a controversial holiday. It was a remnant of pagan fertility rituals, a celebration of spring that involved dancing, drinking, and sexuality. The Puritans had spent years trying to stamp it out in England. And here was Thomas Morton, resurrecting it on the frontier. On May 1st, the settlers of Merrymount erected a massive 80-foot pine tree in the center of their clearing. They decorated it with a pair of buck's antlers near the top and draped it in garlands of flowers and colorful ribbons. Morton, playing the role of the host, attached his own poetry to the pole, complex, satirical verses that mocked the gnomes of Plymouth and celebrated the Greek gods. He brewed a massive barrel of beer and cases of brandy. The English settlers and their Native American allies danced hand in hand around the Maypole in a bacchanal, drumming, singing, and firing their muskets into the air. Governor Bradford later wrote about this event with trembling rage. He described Morton as a lord of misrule, and the settlers as beast-like men who were reviving the mad bacchanalians of Rome. He accused them of inviting Indian women for, as he put it, dancing and frisking together. To the Pilgrims, this wasn't just a party. It was idol worship. It was the calf of Horeb being erected in their promised land. But beneath the religious outrage, there was a cold, hard economic reality. Merrymount was succeeding where Plymouth was failing. Morton's liberal trading policies meant he was cornering the fur market. The Pilgrims owed massive debts to their investors in London. If Morton monopolized the beaver trade, Plymouth would go bankrupt. The school of atheism, as Bradford called it, was actually a thriving competitor. The Pilgrims decided they had to act. They could not allow a rival colony to exist that armed the natives, liberated servants, and mocked their religion. They sent letters to other scattered English settlements, warning them of the danger Morton posed. They raised money to fund a military expedition. The man they sent to do the job was Captain Miles Standish. Standish was the military commander of Plymouth, a short, fiery man with a red face and a temper to match. Morton, never one to miss a chance for mockery, nicknamed him Captain Shrimp. In June of 1628, while most of the Merrymount men were away trading, Standish and his militia arrived. The raid was anticlimactic. Morton was inside his fortified house, likely well into his cups. When Standish surrounded the building, Morton came out to negotiate, but the talks quickly broke down. According to Morton's own account, which is dripping with sarcasm, he claims his men were too drunk to lift their muskets to their shoulders. He says one of his men drunkenly ran his nose onto the point of a sword. The Pilgrims, however, tell a story of a tent standoff where Morton tried to shoot Standish, but the weapon misfired or was knocked aside. Regardless of the details, the Battle of Merrymount ended without a single shot fired in anger. Morton was captured. The Pilgrims, perhaps fearing that executing an English gentleman with legal connections would bring the wrath of the king down on them, decided to maroon him instead. They left him on the Isles of Shoals, a desolate rock off the coast of New Hampshire, with nothing but a thin suit of clothes. He was eventually rescued by an English ship and returned to London. But the spirit of Merrymount wasn't dead yet. The following year, a new wave of Puritans arrived, led by the stern John Endicott. If the Pilgrims were severe, Endicott was iron-fisted. He marched to Mount Wollaston, found the Maypole still standing, and in a symbolic act of violence, hacked it down with his broadaxe, declaring that the settlement should no longer be called Merrymount, but Mount Dagon, after the Philistine idol. It was the final nail in the coffin. The settlement was burned, the goods seized, and the community scattered. The experiment was over. Thomas Morton, incredibly, returned to Massachusetts a year later. He was a man possessed by a need for vindication. But the colony had changed. The Puritans were now firmly in control of Massachusetts Bay. They arrested him again, burned his house down in front of his eyes, and banished him once more. He spent the rest of his life writing a book called New English Canaan, a biting satire of the Pilgrims and a beautiful defense of his vision for America, a vision of integration, abundance, and joy. So why does the story of Merrymount matter to us today? It matters because it asks, what if? History is written by the victors and the Puritans won. Their vision of America, one of separation, industry, and moral rigidity, became the bedrock of the national mythos. We celebrate Thanksgiving, not May Day. But Merrymount represents a lost timeline. It was a glimpse of an America that was more secular, more integrated with indigenous peoples, and perhaps a little more fun. The destruction of the Maypole was more than just a police action against a rowdy neighbor. It was the moment when the English colonies decided what they were going to be. They chose the Bible over the beaver. They chose separation over assimilation. Thomas Morton eventually died in Maine, poor and broken, largely forgotten by history. But for a brief, flickering moment in the 1620s on a hill overlooking the Atlantic, there was a different kind of song being sung. And if you listen closely to the history of New England beneath the hymns and the sermons, you can almost hear the faint echo of drums, the laughter of a feast, and the ribbons of the Maypole snapping in the wind.